We are at the top of the hour, and you have joined the Frank Figliuzzi show. If you stumbled into here, and you're actually on a flight to Auckland instead of Oakland, famous guy who got on the flight to Auckland, uh, you're hanging in there with us. And I know that I was telling Chris, it's fraught with peril to have a show not only on a Friday, but as the U.S. is playing Australia in the World Cup. Last I looked, U.S. was up 2-0. That could have changed in the last couple of minutes. But so I'm extra grateful that everybody's joining. What we're going to do today, I think it's the first time I've done this in this format, is I want to do analysis based on your questions. So I have topics, but I very much want to hear your questions on those topics and respond to them and get your thoughts. I'm going to share some of the most important things I see coming out of the week's news. And Chris Sampson, all the way from Ukraine, has graciously offered to serve as our moderator. And his function is going to be to pay attention to those questions you are sending us as we tee up the topics. And then we'll have breaks, as they say in the World Cup games these days. We're having a match break. That's something
Hydration break.
Hydrate. Yeah, they've added breaks in. For those of you who don't know, they've added more breaks in, and on hot days, it's a very healthy thing to do. We'll be having match break where I tee up a few topics. We have a break. Chris says, "Hey, here are some of the key questions coming out of that segment," and we'll try and answer the questions. That's where we are. We've got over 200 folks already. Let's go ahead, and I'm going to start, as they say, at the beginning, which means, Chris, we've had breaking news in the last, I don't know, half hour, which is that the Trump Justice Department had been ordered by federal Judge Brinkman to promise in writing that they're not going to revisit the slush fund. And the authority there for this federal judge, and I call it the slush fund for felons. And you remember where you said, well, how can a judge do that? This was all about that IRS, the lawsuit, and it didn't go anywhere. And then Trump claimed, well, I have a settlement to the lawsuit, which, by the way, is not a settlement. And the settlement is in my good graces, I'll just make sure the DOJ gives a lot of money to my friends. That's my settlement. And the judge over that case said, hold on a minute. That's not my settlement. And I'm hearing, that I think Attorney General Blanche is promising verbally, you might have remembered in an ill testimony, to not move forward with the slush fund for felons, which really has all the makings of paying off violent people who committed an insurrection. And so what did we learn today, folks? Guess what? The U.S. Department of Justice has said to the judge, essentially, F you. We are not going in writing saying that we are going to never revisit the slush fund idea. And they're claiming that this is not the judge's purview, that this is beyond the judiciary's ability to tell the executive branch what to do, blah, blah, blah. You are not the boss of me. And so now, for those of us who always suspected that Trump wants this slush fund no matter what, it looks like, yeah, that's what's happening. And don't mess with Judge Brinkema. We'll see what happens there. But that's the news. Happy to take any questions on that.
Yeah, Laura asks, are they still going to allow Trump and family to not be audited?
Yeah, I think that will not succeed ultimately in court. I think the challenges there will be a problem for Trump. I'm disturbed by it. We're going to see on this larger question, we're going to see wholesale pardons of everybody. He could theoretically say, I'm pardoning myself and my family and every single federal employee, who ever did anything for me. But let's save up our questions for, I got a couple more stories, and then we'll we'll take that match break for the question.
Right.
Um, I feel compelled to say this. Everybody's talking about it. I was just on today with Dino Badala on his Substack show, ranting about the so-called Iran deal, which is nothing but a cocktail napkin with an MOU. And in case anybody left out there doesn't know how I feel about it, it's not a deal. It's a disaster. It's a disaster for national security. We're ultimately going to be giving back to Iran billions of dollars. And they are the largest state sponsor of terrorism in the history of the world. And they still are. And this is nothing but an attempt at face saving by Trump. He started a war. He's lost the war. He's surrendered to a state sponsor of terrorism. We've got nothing to show for this. We have a hardcore regime still in place. We had that before the war. We have allegedly an open Strait of Hormuz. We had that before the war. We have no extra ability to stop or monitor nuclear program production than we had before the war. You could argue we have a worse position right now to do that. We've had our military bases in the Middle East region struck. Soldiers and sailors have died. And Iran is empowered by all of this. And so nothing but a disaster. Is there any good news on that story? There are cracks in the MAGA armor that are beginning to form. They're becoming more and more vocal. Far-right lawmakers are right to say, this is a mistake. I don't like it. And then let's insert the whole Israel topic in here, where they are the proverbial fly in the ointment. They'll do whatever they want. Despite Trump's statement today, when a reporter asked him about Israel, and he said, they do what I say. They don't do what it says. And, by the way, Israel does need to take care of business with regard to Hezbollah as a threat in Lebanon. And they had soldiers killed today. So, look, we're nowhere on this, and we're worse because we're going to end up giving more money than ever. And yes, it's their money. I know that. People are saying, well, it's not our money, it's their frozen assets. Yeah, they don't deserve them. They were frozen for a reason, and there's no reason to unfreeze them. So that's my rant. I'll go to one more topic, and then we'll take some questions on anything I just said and anything else. Let's go to DNI, the Directorate of National Intelligence. And let's talk about the week's events with regard to the president now polling his own nominee. Think about this. I nominate Jay Clayton, currently U.S. Attorney, Southern District of New York, former chairman of the SEC, someone who, while I believe is wholly unqualified to serve as the DNI, is at least seen by many moderates as, okay, look, he's better than Tulsi Gabbard, right? I don't know. He's got a law degree. He understands working in the government. He was a prosecutor for a year in New York and understands at least how terrorism might get prosecuted. Okay. People stepping up, people like Mark Warner and Jim Himes going, well, maybe we could live with him. And what does Trump do this week? He pulls Jay Clayton, delays the hearing that was scheduled for what, yesterday? Wednesday? Says, tells Clayton, don't show up for the hearing. And what's that about? It's about the fact, a couple of things. One, Trump wants acting DNI, Bill Pulte, the mortgage guy, who's over at FHFM, overseeing Fannie Mac and Freddie Mae, or Freddie Mac and Ginnie Mae, and all of those women. And, and okay, so here's the question. Here's how I think through this. Why? Why is Trump so goddamn intent on putting the mortgage guy, Bill Pulte, as a temporary acting DNI and not getting his way with Jay Clayton. What's wrong with that? He had the skids were greased for Jay Clayton. So we have to ask ourselves, what is the intention to put the mortgage guy in as an acting at DNI? What is my theory there? Because by the way, we're talking way too much about the DNI role. I'll tell you just from my own experience and having had countless visits with the DNI when I was the head of counterintelligence for the FBI. It was just part of your briefing package. You had to go to regular meetings. You had to tell them of any updates. They just oversee the community, right? So, but it's a bureaucracy. Why am I saying we're talking way too much about it? It's an administrative role. They do budget and collection assignment and overview. So why are we talking so much about the DNI? Because Trump seems obsessed with this position. And that should worry all of us, because I think, this is my gut, I think the plan is to put Pulte in as an acting and have him disclose some magical classified mystery that shows that there's a foreign threat to our upcoming election. And that would then justify some aberrational way to run the midterms. That's what I think is happening. Theoretically, they could put Pulte in as an acting and go almost up to November if they really wanted to. And that's my concern. There's no other reason to put Pulte in as an acting when you could have had Jay Clayton confirmed this week. So something is wrong. And what else has happened because of this delay? Trump has tied this whole thing to the FISA, well, to two things, to the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act expiration of Section 702. We are now a week without FISA being extended, and particularly Section 702, which allows, really, in a very quick nutshell, allows mostly the FBI to check NSA intercepts to see if an American has been talking to a terrorist or a spy. Okay? I don't like that we're blind on that. I can go an hour on all the things wrong with Section 702 and all the fixes that could happen to it. It's done without a warrant because you collect the foreigner's conversation, right? Internationally. And you don't need a warrant for that. And they're righteous targets, terrorists and spies and associates. And then, you call your Uncle Jim in Pakistan and say happy birthday from Dallas. And you're incidentally intercepted. And the FBI can go, hey, anybody been talking to terrorist Jim? Yes, a guy in Dallas. And then the Bureau can go, oh, well, we need to identify him and see how many times he's talked to the guy in Pakistan. That's done without a warrant. That's not, then they go to the carriers, they go to Google and your phone carrier, and they say, look, don't give us content, but give us what's going on. How many times has he done? Who else is he dialing up and emailing? And the carriers turn that over. But the problem now with it lapsing, that authority lapsing, is the carriers can say, no, we think Congress needs to reauthorize this. Now, right now, what I'm told from good sources is that it's still working, in that the FISA court has certified, earlier this year, the FISA court itself said, we're good with Section 702. It's good through March, right? So the carriers, in terms of, are we facing imminent terror attack because of this lapse? I think not, because the carriers seem to be saying, we're going to recognize the FISA court certification through March. But you better get your act together, Congress. So the other thing, that's being tied to the whole DNI mess is the so-called Save America Act, which is that Trump is now saying, you know what? God darn it, I'll tie the whole thing in. The nominations, DNI, FISA, and you know what? I'm not doing anything with FISA until you guys vote for the Save America Act, which actually is the Unsave America Act, because it's all about requiring national identification requirements for our elections, which by constitutional authority are run by the state. So, and again, I talked about cracks in the armor. Senate Majority Leader John Thune, man, is he between a rock and a hard place. He's pushing back on this. This Save America Act, where the feds are going to take over elections and dictate ID requirements. They're pushing back on this. It's a mess, folks. It's essentially an extortionate demand for our national security on FISA and the DNI role, because Trump wants to nationally control the elections. Okay, I've talked enough about the top stories for now. Let's go to questions, Chris.
All right. And again, for our viewers, if you have questions on the 3 topics we have covered so far, please put them in the commentary and we will read them back. So I'm going to read back sort of in reverse order because I think they flow. Frank, could you please do an interview with everyone who has a Substack? Don Lemon, Jim Acosta, Kirshner, everyone, because they need to know this. That's what Aiden said.
You think so? I'm inferring from that you think Don Lemon's not, and others who are more popular than I, don't have the national security lens. Is that you think? Is that how you're reading that, Chris?
I think they at least want to make sure the news is going far and wide. And you actually brought up a good point. You were on with Dino Badala earlier. I was just talking to Marty Said earlier. So the more that we talk about this and get these lenses out there, it's good. But by all means, to the viewers, you can always write to those people and say, we would love to hear Frank with Jim Acosta, which I
Chris, that's why you're here, man. So, because I call that reverse booking. That, my challenge is booking guests. And by the way, I've been thrilled with the guests that I'm getting, and we got more coming. But it's a reverse book when you try to push yourself on someone else's show. The way to do it is what Chris just said, which is for you all to say, have you heard about Frank? and why don't you put him on your show? Yeah. All right. That's a good
one. When all of us here bring so and so on, we know to pay attention to.
I do it myself. I've had guests on because people have suggested them.
You've had really good guests that some of us couldn't be able to bring onto this platform. So, Cindy asked do you think Pulte is more capable than Gabbard to pull it off? So now I'm going to say I'm not sure what it would be, but let's assume we sort of mean like the obfuscation that's in the gears, because that's pretty much what Gabbard was doing. Is Pulte more capable of throwing gum in the wax?
Well, I pointed people on my own Substack to your piece last week, Chris, on Gabbard, essentially, literally on her way out the door, trying to toe the Putin and talking about these biolabs, in Ukraine and everywhere. My answer to the question is yeah. I think that in part, Gabbard is out the door, and I realize her husband has serious form of cancer. But, one of the reasons I think he's out now is because she has failed Trump in not executing as he wanted, not executing enough. Whereas Bill Pulte has proven his worth already by using proprietary mortgage loan information that he accesses in his official position at FHF to target the president's enemies. Trish James, Jim Comey, Adam Schiff, and on. He's done it. He's been there. He's done it. He's proven it. He's smarter. The guy runs $10 million, portfolio. $10 trillion. $10 trillion portfolio of mortgage loans. Ran Pulte Homes, and yes, he's got the loyalty and the smarts, and he's proven he'll do it. We just got to figure out what it is. And you heard my theory on what I think he's going to try to do with Pulte.
Regarding the Trump-Iran deal. Yeah. What happened to the U.S. standard of not negotiating with terrorists, i.e., the Iran-sponsored terrorists?
Wow. Yeah. Well, all right. So, the cynics out there will say, look, we always say we don't negotiate with terrorists, but of course, throughout history, the U.S. has actually done that. But the ultimate negotiating with terrorists, yes, would be negotiating with the top world sponsor in history of terrorism. And they kill Americans, they kill everybody, and they want to continue doing it. And we should not be sitting down at the table with such hardliners. If the objective was to change regime to a more civil leadership, if the objective was to bring Iran into the fold of civilized nations, we've not done it. We've done the exact opposite. We've done it the wrong way with untrained negotiators. Within the last 24 hours, Vice President Vance has jokingly said, people wonder if why I'm qualified to be a negotiator. Well, I just spent an hour on the View television show. That's not funny. That's not funny.
Yeah.
Right?
It's so JD.
He's
Flippant as always.
yeah, flippant, and also not reading the room, not getting it, right? Just can't really deliver a joke. He is a joke. Yeah.
Ugh. On the same topic briefly, Renee says, how will we get a reliable number of casualties from the Iran war?
We will not. I don't, so certainly I don't trust the Iranian government to give us an accurate number, but I don't now, sadly, I don't trust the US government to give us an accurate number. And in that vein, let's talk about the girls' school and
Right.
that allegedly DOD, or if you want to call it DOW for Department of War, is in the last final stages of approving its investigative report on the mistaken bombing of the girls' school in Iran.
Tomahawk.
What's that?
Tomahawk missile.
Yeah, well, and I'm eager to hear your thought, Chris, on this as well. You're sitting in a combat theater right now. Do I think we're going to get a transparent investigative report on that girls' school? Absolutely not. And that's their own fault for creating a society where no one believes anything anymore. Could they slap a classified label on it and we won't see half of it? Absolutely. Targeting, and you could say, well, targeting packages, we don't talk about targeting. But the other thing that fascinates me, and tell me what your thoughts are, is have we just witnessed in that school tragedy the first use or the first glaring use of AI for targeting that has gone horribly wrong? What are your thoughts?
So I think that the indicators are at least substantial, above 50% that attempted AI tracking was involved in that, above 50%. But the reason why I'm way above 75% on that it was a Tomahawk was the denial from the U.S. and the way that they just basically screwed the entire messaging operation. So over the top screwed it that it was like, well, I pretty much know that that's what happened. I feel this way with the Russians. There are times where I could be ambiguous just because of the nature of, as we call it, the fog of war. And
Yeah,
then Russia speaks and they go, oh, well, there went all the ambiguity.
yeah,
And it sometimes shut up is a good response to make the ambiguity sustain itself.
I
And
think you're
they
right.
don't.
I think you're right. You know, it's also the response this week from Trump on
Like
the
we want tomahawks. See, the reason why we want tomahawks, we like tomahawks to hit things. So we
great.
know when a tomahawk hits something, it's like, oh, that's how you do it.
You could, yeah, you've lived that. Yeah, the response, the disturbing response from Trump this week is also noteworthy. He was asked by a journalist at the G7, "What's the story with the report on the girls' school? When's that coming?" And specifically, Mr. Trump, are you going to hold anybody accountable for this?
Mm-hmm.
And his cavalier response was, basically, shit happens. War is hell. Mistakes happen. Yeah. So no, you have to ask Hegseth about that. So that I read that as, no one's going to be held accountable when we screw up. And,
Right.
and yeah, and that's the attitude. Nobody likes war crimes, and so he certainly doesn't need that hanging over his head, but he doesn't care either. Anything else on the section of stories we've just covered?
Also, yeah, again to our viewers, if you have questions there. Down here, one of our questions: heard Trump's agreement violates law that in last April, Iran was designated as a terrorist organization, which restricts the admin from releasing any money for 4 years. Any opinion on how far that goes?
Ooh. Well, of course they are. Yeah, they are designated. That's why the sanctions are there. That's why the assets are frozen.
And didn't we go through this with the Taliban? By the way, off my memory, that's my additional
Sounds
question.
sounds familiar. So look, I think there's going to be tremendous blowback. There already is on this notion of giving the state sponsor of terrorism their money back without anything in return. But I think it's going to happen, and I don't think Trump's going to let the law get in the way or anything like that. I think he'll do it if he wants to, and it's going to just in case you got friends and neighbors who are MAGA telling you, well, Obama gave them money. Whatever Obama did with them pales financially in giving Iran back billions of dollars, billions of dollars. So, all right. Anything else on this section before I move to the next section of stories?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. So, um, before we get on to other stories, I want to address right up front what I think is the most compelling news of the week in terms of not only this story, but all the other indicators and warning signs around it and where we're going with it potentially. And that is the news that 15 people were charged this week and called Antifa in because of their actions to track ICE agent locations. They're being charged with several federal charges, including felony assault, solicitation to commit a crime of violence, and interstate threats. Just the conspiracy charge carries up to 6 years in prison. 15 people being labeled Antifa. Now, you say, well, Frank, you're a former federal, and sure, you're into officer safety and keeping agents safe. Yes, I am. And yes, we're going to get in the weeds eventually in this case on each and every person charged and see if they were actually responsible for or advocating violence against law enforcement. But I take this case and the labeling of this case as Antifa, and I attach it to all the other indicators we have, which is that our State Department is telling the rest of the world to prioritize left-wing terror, that our law enforcement community is being told the problems with the left, find it. That we've had a case, this year where in Fort Worth, Texas, where we had our first terrorism conviction, material support to terrorism convictions in federal court, and called people Antifa because they were activists who showed up outside an ICE detention facility. Yes, one of them went bad, and an officer was shot. But that guy who did that was charged with murder, as he should be. But the others were labeled Antifa. This is a design. It's going forward, and we are trying to criminalize protesters and protest organizers as terrorists. And it's a First Amendment violation, to say the least. And that's why I picked that story, right? Because it would otherwise kind of go, I don't know, 15 knuckleheads must have done something bad. No, it's part of a much bigger story, folks. And we need to demand answers on each and every one of those 15 people and what they really did. Watch whether the case holds, but see it as part of a Trump strategy to label freedom of assembly, freedom of speech, as Antifa terrorism. So if you see ICE down the street at a business and you call around and go, "Hey, ICE is in the neighborhood. Be careful." Are you? Are you a terrorist? That's the story that we need to watch.
Or if you have a WhatsApp group or a Facebook group or any such chatter on a organized chat, then you're
Yeah,
a terrorist.
and so we talked about the internet carriers and all that earlier. We have caught DHS and ICE trying to go to those carriers, Instagram, uh, and without a warrant, and say, this guy, this unknown account, we don't know who it is posting the location of ICE in the neighborhood, or is posting criticism of ICE. Tell us who they are. No warrants. And then in many cases, those carriers, their legal counsels have said, not only hell no, but we're telling our subscriber that you asked about them. And then here comes so the ICE didn't go away. ICE said, you know what? We'll get a grand jury subpoena. We'll go to a grand jury. and
Right.
and they showed up with grand jury subpoenas. And now the carriers are like, I don't know. I got a grand. So be aware of this, folks. Be aware that if you're going to post something, critical ICE, that they're watching.
Well, one question I would have, and I think it's sort of there's a couple questions that are in this ballpark. Is could they designate Antifa? Is something you've talked about for years is that we do not have a domestic terrorism statute that you can cite, and so maybe for the viewers, explain how there's difference between you seeing something you think is bad and then actually having a statute by which you can charge.
Yeah, there's two sides to this coin. There's the fact that before this second administration of Trump, the US did not have a formal mechanism. I would argue we still don't, but we do now in Trump's move to designate a domestic terrorist organization. We absolutely have a formal mechanism to do it for an international terror organization. And it involves State Department and Treasury and the intelligence community and all of that. It's very loud, and we show all our work and we say, here's why Boko Haram is a terrorist, here's why Hezbollah. Okay. And importantly, when that designation happens for an international terror group, here comes all of your investigative and intelligence toolkit with that. Because now, if God forbid you get a pizza delivery from a known designated terror group member, you get all hell's coming down on your pizza.
Yep.
So that's how that works. And that's why we should be worried when Trump tells then Attorney General Bondi Antifa is a terror group designated. And now it is. It is, but we don't know what it is, except we know it's terrorism. The other side of the coin is not just designating a group, but your point that I've made over the years is we did not have a domestic terrorism offense in the federal penal code. You could get an extra sentence tacked on for being involved in domestic terrorism. So let's say you rob a bank to support your a domestic terror group. We're going to charge you with bank robbery. You're going to go away for 10 years. Plus, if we find out, it was to fund a domestic terror group, we're going to tack on an extra sentence for you. But the charge is bank robbery. And I've always said, boy, that's really not helpful. We should have a charge called domestic terrorism. Well, now we have Trump saying everything is domestic terrorism. Everything I don't like
And
is
he
domestic terrorism.
was able to do it without a Congress. He's so efficient.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So has Frank changed? Have I changed my mind? I might have. I might have. Yeah.
Well, there's a few things that are not quite questions, but they're around good questions. So I'm going to turn them slightly into questions to answer them. Like Antifa has no members. When you're as a FBI investigator and you run into a cluster of people operating as if a group, as if a cell, but they don't have a name, They don't have membership cards. There's no dues. You found no records of such things, but yet they operated as if one. They might as well have had one. How does that break down into you guys preparing a case?
So you're talking domestic now, right?
Let's just say it's a domestic.
Yeah.
We can use any of the number of examples of the last 40 years of domestic groups like the Order. We could,
Militia, a white
yeah,
supremacist.
yeah,
Yeah,
any of these groups. Some of them actually had memberships, but what if it's really ephemeral? What if it's
sure.
not quite like that?
Yeah. So you've got to find your underlying charges. So if you're going to kidnap the governor of Michigan
That's an
and
example.
and you're a bunch of good old boys shooting at beer cans in the woods every weekend, but there's some structure to it. Your charges are going to be attempted kidnapping and conspiracy or murder, um, interstate travel, for active violence, gun charges. All of that can be built, and the conspiracy will be built around your evidence of your meetings, any formality to them, joint agreements to work together as co-conspirators, the acquisition of supplies, how far you've gone with your plan, all of that. At the ultimate, there's a RICO charge that could be used. Racketeering organization, corrupt, racketeering influence, corrupt organization. You take down the Hells Angels with that kind of work. You can take down drug cartels with that kind of work, and show the
Could you take down peace and justice centers?
peace and justice centers. You have to show. So if you're gonna claim RICO or something at that level, you're essentially saying this organization exists for the purpose of crime. It is a racketeering influence, corrupt organization at its core. That's what it's about. And the problem is, I don't see that with anything we've labeled Antifa so far.
Right.
I don't see it.
They said so. Courtney said, or the SPLC. But as an example, they are going after SPLC. They are going after
Yeah,
trying to spin at an official level, not at the Fox BS level, but at an official level, trying
right.
to spin the idea that it's in fact the trackers of extremists that are creating extremism.
Yeah, right. Yeah. It's like, oh yeah, right back at
I did
you.
that with a straight face.
Right. Yeah, we're right back at you. You're tracking us, and we don't like it. But the underlying charges there are things like fraud. What they're claiming is, and it's almost hysterical if it wasn't so gravely serious. Well, people who donate to the Southern Poverty Law Center, they never thought their money would go to actually penetrate terror organizations. Well, yeah, no, yeah, that's why you give money to the SPLC so they do their mission. Their mission is what? To fight back against oppression and terror and discrimination. That's why you give your money to SPLC. So this case is like this fraud case that, oh, you're doing things that your donors wouldn't think you would do. No, they don't like it. They just don't like who they're tracking and penetrating. And that, look, I don't know. SPLC will have to show they did everything by the book, all of that. And this idea, well, you're taking donor money and you're paying informants with it. And some of those informants are bad people. Well, yeah, we don't we don't recruit you don't recruit Boy Scouts as informants. You so it's silly on its face. Yes, you give money to sources. Yeah, then they're bad people. That's why they're sources. So, yeah.
Some of our viewers are bringing up ICE and the detention facilities. Now, I know we're not talking about immigration tonight, but it does bring up something very important with a few of these questions popping up here with Geo Group and CCA, of course, Civic now. Um, do you anticipate a time when those facilities would be used to house civilians that the administration decides are unworthy?
The warehouses that are being purchased around the country, the land that's being purchased to build warehouses that can hold, I even hate using the word warehouse when we're talking about people, but 10,000 people, one facility. That folks, that's what's being purchased right now by our government. And yes, Do I think all of that's going to, go toward actually processed, undocumented migrants and hold them? No, no, I don't. No, I think there are plans, folks. And, there's just too much property, too much square footage being purchased by the wrong agency, DHS. And yes, I'm very concerned that it looks a lot and smells a lot like internment camps for the Japanese during World War II, which our Supreme Court, in a case called Karamatsu versus the United States, said, that was bad. We should not be doing that again. Some of those people were U.S. citizens, folks, Japanese.
Oh, man.
They were U.S. cits put in those camps. I've got, I can move on if you'd like, or we have more questions on those topics.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
All right. And folks, feel free to shoot Chris. Just shoot the questions.
I'm watching your questions in there, everybody. So just drop them in there.
Yep. So here's one. Again, it's put this under the heading of the corruption continues. And I know we're getting sick and tired of the grift and the corruption, but it's important not to look away from it because historically, and folks like Ruth Ben Ghiat will tell you this. I've had her on my show. I've been on her show. The corruption's important because often throughout history, in authoritarian regimes, it's the people finally reaching the point of disgust with the corruption that will bring down that leader. So yes, I know it's tempting even for me. Some seemingly little thing like this goddamn UFC cage fight on the White House, where we now know Trump purchased stock in the parent company of UFC. The company's called TKO. It owns UFC. He purchased stock before announcing the cage fight, and then he pumped it up. It's kind of like a pump and dump scheme. He pumped it up publicly, and then he made money from it. And we go, okay, he bought 30 grand in stock. He's done a lot worse than that. But you can't let go of it because it could end up in the demise of an authoritarian regime, and has in history. So what am I pointing to today, this week? DHS Secretary Markwayne Mullin. Do you know what kratom is? Kratom, you might, if anybody ever steps inside a convenience store or gas station anymore, we all pay at the pump, don't we? But if you go inside a convenience store or gas station, it's likely you're going to see some energy drink or energy pill, and it might be called Kratom, kratom. It comes from a leaf, kratom leaf. It is really bad stuff. I mean, liver damage type stuff, marketed as energy, wellness, whatever. It is absolutely bad for you. If you've got someone in your life and you see them with kratom, you need to sit them down and absolutely have a come to Jesus talk with them. Why am I even bringing this thing up? Markwayne Mullin owns up to $1 million of a kratom company. And you say, well, that's his personal business. No, it's not anymore. It's not a personal business anymore. Now it's our business, because the reporting is, and just so you know, I've got this in front of me so I get it right. Kratom is a plant from Asia that hits the same brain receptors as opioids. Okay? And it's for sale in your local corner gas station. People take it for energy or pain. It can be addictive and it can kill. There is no age check and no honest labeling requirement. Markwayne Mullin owns up to $1 million in a kratom company. He stood at an FDA, Food and Drug Administration. He stood at an FDA podium and pushed rules to crush his company's rivals. And he never sold his stock when he became the secretary of DHS. This is the reporting. The company he's involved with was founded by a felon who stole $10 million and did prison time. These kratom shots are tied to liver damage. When I say shot, I'm talking about a liquid, are tied to liver damage, seizures, and death. There have been 5,200 overdose deaths in 5 years from kratom. A 27-year-old student took it for 6 weeks and died. The same company paid a Trump-connected lobbyist. This is the same company that Mark Wayne Mullen is into for $1 million, reportedly. The same company paid a Trump-connected lobbyist $600,000. And then came the payoff. The Justice Department, your U.S. Justice Department, dropped its lawsuit against this kratom company. The FDA scrubbed all the warnings off of its website, and your friend RFK Jr. called the Ohio governor to kill a proposed state ban on kratom. You know what Kennedy got after that? This is from the New York Times. The company then wired $1 million to RFK's to a PAC tied to RFK. The graft and corruption continues, and it's deadly. Your kid, your grandkid, could walk into that gas station and buy the kratom, whatever it's called. Mark Wayne Mullen, Homeland Security is what he's all about. You just can't make this stuff.
If I were to do it by the numbers, the number one question is WTF.
Yeah.
20, that's at least 15 of them were WTF question mark. So why don't we start with that question?
Really? Oh my
But
God.
it's true, because after all of the griping about like fentanyl and the Chinese are trying to kill us with fentanyl, and why isn't the sanctuary city stopping the fentanyl addiction? And it's like, no, go to the other convenience store. Oh, got him. Okay, never mind.
Yeah. And, so the guy who's supposed to be protecting our homeland security is an investor up to $1 million in a company that's killing people. The guy who's supposed to be in charge of our health, Secretary of HHS, Bobby Kennedy Jr., he calls the governor of Ohio, tells him, hey, nix the ban on kratom. The company sends his PAC money. Even as we speak, Bobby Kennedy is so busy sort of looking over our health that he's sitting in a VIP box in a seat in Seattle.
Smelling like rotten cabbage, from what
I've heard that, the sauerkraut smell. He's sitting at the USA Australia soccer match right now because, hey, why not?
And everyone, please do not separate Mark and Wayne. It's Mark Wayne. Okay, so
Mark Wayne, one word. Mark Wayne.
One of the weirdest things I get to make distinctions about here. It's not Mark space Wayne. It's Mark Wayne. So we got to get that right. Again, if you guys have questions, I'm reading them down in space.
Yeah, I want to, while you're looking at people's questions, let's go to World Refugee Day is tomorrow, Saturday. World Refugee Day. Do you know what Trump has up his sleeve for World Refugee Day?
More deportations?
Well, reportedly, he's going to bring some refugees to the White House that he cares deeply about and showcase his refugee program. Chris, would you like to guess who those refugees will be that will be invited to the White House?
They'll either be white farmers from South Africa.
You can stop right there. They will be Afrikaners who have been brought in to the United States because, they're undergoing such oppression there in South Africa. And this is according to Reuters news agency. The move comes as more than 120,000 refugees from multiple countries who have already been approved for resettlement have been blocked from coming into the United States. But Trump expanded the refugee admissions for Afrikaners, increasing the cap to 17,500 because it's an emergency refugee situation.
Mhm.
So let's pay attention to World Refugee Day and honor the oppressed white Afrikaners who Trump brought in to seek refuge here.
The quiet ANC in me is a little happy now. It's like, okay, go ahead, go away,
Yeah, there
my
you
friend.
go.
Go to America.
The
Salagatli, as we say in Zulu, Salagatli. It
which
means go
means so
well.
long or what?
It means go well.
Oh, how about this mess? If you're sitting in the Secret Service as a dedicated Secret Service employee, and you're thinking we're finally getting the funding to modernize security. We're going to go anti-drone. We're going to do this right. And you find out this news that the Trump administration's budget office has redirected $350 million of your Secret Service budget in training recruitment to what it describes as security measures at the White House, which is the ballroom. The ball-
Exactly.
Yeah. The OMB,
Uh,
OMB did not specify the purpose of the unusually large shift. But a person familiar with the Secret Service budget, speaking anonymously, told the Post the funding will help pay for the ballroom. Yeah. So, folks, I know you didn't believe it on day one when Trump said, no taxpayer money is going for this ballroom. But now we find out, oh no, at least 350 million bucks that's supposed to go toward
right.
protecting dignitaries and protectees. Yeah, that's coming out of the budget. That's our taxpayer money. Yeah.
I mean, and I don't deal with air traffic since I live over here in a place where we don't fly. But last time I heard in America, it was a mess. And some of the other areas of security that are involved is not merely convenience, but actual security are being completely destroyed with these budgeting motions, not just Doge, but just in general the incompetence.
I saw, you're right. I see someone is asking a question. How depleted is our treasury at this point? Is that Jackie? I got to tell you, Jackie, I've had the same question you've just had, which is I think we're going to wake up one day when this is all over and we're going to be told we are flat broke. I really this nonsense about the tariff. Oh, you wouldn't believe the money that's coming in from tariffs, and oh my God, the oil sales out of Venezuela, and oh my God, and we're just making money hand over fist. I I got to tell you, Jack, and thanks for asking the question. Yeah, I think we're broke. I don't- I I don't. I think we're going to be cleaned out. We're going to wake up, and then the next president's going to go. I got nothing. Yeah, I'm
How much? I mean, I don't know. Did you ever go through funding gaps that created projects, or like serious risk to projects that the FBI had to maintain, where suddenly budgeting was kicking in? You're like, how the hell we're gonna maintain this
oh my
fingerprint
gosh.
lab or whatever it was?
Yeah, for sure. The drills that we've been through, if you're an executive in the FBI and you have this, and it happened during my tenure as AD. I can't get into obviously classified details, but yeah,
Sure.
being told prepare, incoming torpedo, prepare for huge budget gap. Start deciding, get your people together, start deciding what you're not going to do.
Hmm.
In my case, in counterintelligence, and then replicate that exercise throughout the bureau. And yes, you sit there, your head's pounding like, oh my God, I just canceled these three programs. You know, it's unbelievable. And then the first thing to take a hit is recruitment and training,
Hmm.
which I got to tell you, sadly, in this administration, maybe we want to call timeout on recruit. So I don't know, but that's the
Well,
first
this is
thing.
why I often ask you and Glenn Kirshner, like, what do you say to some young person who's like, I want to be an FBI guy? You're like,
Yeah, yeah. Wait, timeout. Total timeout. We'll just wait. It
give
will
it a
get
few minutes, Howie.
better. Um, I got another.
Becky
Yeah,
says, do you think that Iran has the Epstein files and is using them to get their way with Trump?
I will say this. In all seriousness, I am very surprised. Well, again, we can't take anything at face value, can we? But I was about to say, I'm very surprised we've not seen a significant series of cyber attacks coming from Iran. They're quite capable. So the cynic in me, if you want to go there, we could theorize that maybe this amazing deal that's been done with Iran might, might, I don't want to sound like a crazy conspiracy theorist, but do they have something on him? What has brought him to this table like this and surrender? I don't know, but I just know this professionally. I'm surprised that they've not done the cyber attacks. At least,
And I wrote that, if you remember, I wrote that article in the first month, a few weeks in. I told everyone, I was like, hey, please be very, very aware. They have alternative means of creating destruction that they have already used. They are quite fast with. They have put state resources into for a long period of time, no less. Anyone who covers APT level hacking knows that the kittens, as we call them,
yeah.
the Persians, very active, and they play asymmetrically. So it is a little surprising that they have not engaged in overt, DDoS attacks or infrastructure attacks.
Yeah,
But
because you would think
we also, maybe we don't know what they have been doing. I'm sure they've been busy, but nothing we.
Well, yeah, I'm sure there's a classified story to be told on the battle going on to suppress their cyber abilities right now, and the degree to which we've taken that out or not. But a lot of that, you would think would have gone remote. That they would have preserved a remote capability that you don't need. You can withstand a missile strike because we don't do this from here, kind of thing. But
Right.
I don't know. But hey, it's pretty cool that we've not experienced it yet. Um, the other story that really got my attention, again, because I'm the national security guy, is the flu outbreak at the Air Force Base in San Antonio.
Mm-hmm.
At least what we're being told, we've got 160 Air Force members. And by the way, if you go to the Air Force, you're likely going to your basic training at this base in San Antonio. It's dual use, but you're going to San Antonio. And if you know anyone in the Air Force, particularly enlisted, they've gone to basic in San Antonio. Well, they're sick. There's at least 160 that we're being told of who have the flu. Why is that a story? It's a story because this comes just months after Hegseth, Secretary of War, um, said, "Yeah, I'm not making the flu shot mandatory anymore. Do what you want." And it's such a larger story. It's a story of um, readiness, playing with our nation's security. It's not just new recruits at that Air Force base; it's a major base, and you've called timeout not only on their training, but you risk everybody getting sick. And to think that you can play with that kind of issue, to think that people who train, eat, fight, and sleep together aren't all going to get each other sick is sick in itself. And the word is that at least the commanders at that base have said we're mandating the shots now. So that's something, but it's indicative, Chris, of something much larger, which is the ignorance of science, the willingness to play
Absolutely.
with it. It's a national security vulnerability. I posted today, stupidity is a national security vulnerability.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And look, you could look at even the minor thing of the reflecting pool turning green and say that too was a rejection of people who know better allegedly telling the president, if you paint the bottom of the pool dark blue, it's going to become a hot house incubator for algae. It's going to increase the temps. And he just blew it off. And it's that kind of thing. It's just, and then move it all the way up to the Iran thing where he was told, undoubtedly, The Iranians are going to block the Strait of Hormuz, sir. The Iranians are going to strike our bases in the region, sir. We're not ready for their drones. And he blew it off. And it's whether it's the reflecting pool or the flu vaccine in the military or Iran, it is what do they call it? Kleptocracy, ruled by the stupid.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's where we are.
And also state capture, a term I really wrapped my head around trying to cover Wagner in Africa, what Russia was doing with the resource procurements. You know, they were trying to deal with these 20, 30, 20, 25, and 30-year mineral deals. But the more I studied it, and it was getting to like policy land, you know, there was this term floating. It was state capture, a form of colonialism. And it was used again um, in my orbit, trying to understand the corruption that stole the resources in Russia, stole the resources in Ukraine early on in 1991 until now, and in the way in which natural resources, media resources, economic resources are stolen. And you and I have talked about this before, that Russia is basically the bottom, and the goal is to get to the bottom, to get to the point of pure corruption where only those who are corrupt will control how things operate. And that's what they're doing in America through all of this graft.
I think so. And it really is getting harder, Chris, to not sound crazy by saying, is the design to break the whole thing? Really? To get all of us sick, to
Mm.
suck the world dry of its oil? What's going on?
What did you find? There's actually, I want to get to several people bringing up the Peter Thiel dialogue post that came out this week. I don't know if you read that.
Yeah.
And if so, that'd be great to hear from you on this. But there was also, you've been talking to some folks who have delved into Christian nationalism, and I've written about it, you know, from a similar point of view of like the terror threat it represents. What did you walk away with it after those interviews you've done? Because you've done some really good interviews.
All right. So first on the dialogue issue and Peter Thiel and
Yeah.
um yeah. So look, when I saw the reporting, I didn't get all exercised about it. You know, and I'm not there yet. Why? These groups of folks, these groups of people, people come, rich people, smart people, people who think they're rich and powerful, want to be, they form groups. You know, it's kind of like the old salon theory. You know, you bring people together, you talk about whatever. It used to be literature and poetry, or you try to solve the world's. You know where this is gone for, I don't know, century.
Sure.
Georgetown in Washington, in those wealthy row houses there in Georgetown, people have dinners, host dinners, and so we get worried about it because number one, the host in this case seems nefarious. We don't like them, and because some people we do like may have showed up at these soirees and think tank kind of weekends. Um, we're now finding out that many of those people that really raised our eyebrows, Westmore, maybe Jim Hines, seem to have showed up once 10 years ago, maybe given a presentation and walked out. I'm not worried about that. People who want to get exposed to, you know, some of this, want to see what's going on. I get it. You get an invitation. Yeah, okay. If you keep going and you know who you're dealing with, then I have a problem with it. But you know, it also feeds into, oh, these evil people are running the world. They're trying to. Uh, they are. But I'm not. This is on the scheme of things on my radar screen. I'm not all worked up about it. If we find out more, you know, that yeah, this guy's a full fledged member, a guy we think is pro democracy, and you know,
Mhm.
guy or gal, but we find out no, they're regulars, they're full blown members. They actually gave talks in favor of, you know, hurting democracy or that. then yeah, of course, it'll come out slowly. But right now, I'm not
Right.
I'm not overly concerned about it. Then you asked
I
about go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. No, no, no.
No, you asked about Christian nationalism separately. I've had a couple of interesting guests on in the last couple of weeks. One was Gareth Gore, who wrote a book called Opus about Opus Dei, which is a far right, very conservative movement within the Christian church. It's a very small movement. I mean, we're talking something like no more than 3,000 members inside the United States. But what was shocking about that, you might say, well, Frank, why do you even spend time talking about 3,000 people in a Catholic movement? Because it's loaded with the most powerful people in Washington. And that's why we'll pay attention to that. So check out Gareth Gore, Gore, and his Gareth Gore, and you'll be shocked. And in Opus Dei, um, from my FBI days, the worst we spied for the Russians for at
Right.
least 10 years because of what he gave up to the Russians. Have some influence, or they think you will. Think about this, Chris. The FBI director at the Hanson was Louis Freeh, a devout Catholic, attended an Opus Dei friendly church. Told we've got our Free has went to the church from Eucharist serving.
The
This is
weirdness
a
of
Russian
some
spy.
circles, my friend.
Yeah. But you asked about Christian nationalism. Reverend Benjamin Kramer, CR
Mhm.
on social media. He's being designated, and he really has some things to say about how
Right.
isn't Christian at all. And that's judging people's, really, oh, you're more Christian or not. No, he comes right out and says, that ain't Christian. And then he brings the receipt.
There's a big turf war in there. I brought in April Joy for the same reason. She was visiting with one of my favorite comedians, Steve Hofstetter, the king of the anti-heckling skill set. And they had a really interesting conversation, and I looked at, more into what she was doing. And there's this movement to confront the garbage in that community by people who seem to be extremely determined to point out how it's been weaponized against people. I'm an impartial, like, I like religious people, but I don't have a religion. So I'm kind of a balls and strikes, and if you're a threat, which actually brings me to a question for you, for our audience, from your angle. I wrote an article recently about the history of Poland and Ukraine, and after really deliberating the sensitivity of the concern, I backed away from it for a few days, and I had this epiphany about a grievance algorithm, if you will. If you don't handle a grievance,
Right.
it doesn't go away. The longer you don't handle a grievance, the worse it can become. Grievances become
Yeah.
violence, etc. So, in the case of Opus Dei and some of these groups, the other part is that I see a much like how tea left to evaporate becomes very strong, you know. Similarly, in extremist groups,
Right.
there is a propensity for something more violent, more edgy than others, and that's what I wanted to know about in your estimation of the Christian nationalists compared to other Christian extreme groups we've covered over the years?
Well, the thing is, I have to tell you, and international terrorism, this fervor that look, this is my belief system. You get to violence than not. Had to do with the insurrection on January 6th as well. I never set foot in a church. You know, their Christmas. God, I am a devout Christian. When's the last time you went to church? I don't want to talk about it. But anyway, look, I see a lot of people are talking about connectivity, internet issues developing. I want to. Here's the thing. I want to end as I always try to do, and those of you who do watch my shows know that I always like to find a good news story for the week. I have found one in a tough week, and that is you've heard me talk before about Trump's cancellation and removal of ocean sensing equipment that our government has installed to monitor climate change, really bad weather, erosion, all kinds of issues that go on under the seas. And he decided, you know what? Yes, it's hundreds of millions of dollars that we spent installing it, but I'm going to rip it all out. Again, this kind of optics. I don't believe in climate change. Why are we monitoring the oceans? The good news that this $368 million ocean monitoring system, critical to climate change and national security, they've hit the pause button on removing it. The Senate passed the measure Wednesday that would block the government from dismantling the system, with lawmakers in both parties, cracks in the armor, warning that the action would be illegal and threaten the safety of local communities. Cracks in the armor, safety prevails. Thank you, everybody, for joining me on a Friday evening. Go USA Soccer and have a good weekend. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you. Don't forget to subscribe to Frank's account.
And Chris. And Chris. On
paid subscriptions help make everything get done. And thank you, everybody.
Yeah. Thank you, Chris. What's your Substack? Give it to us.
The Chris Sampson.
Cool. I'm the Frank Figliuzzi. And that's take care, guys. Bye.